Without further ado, Uncle Harold Hunt has very kindly agreed to come as an elder from St Mary's, the Malyangapa grouping, and I'd like to hand over to Uncle Harold now.
Good afternoon all. Anyway, yes, I'm Harold Hunt and I'm a member of the Malyangapa clan from the corner country of New South Wales, and that's west of the Darling, and it takes in Tippaborough right down through to what is now South Australia, to Lake Frome, and then comes back into to about the Paroo River, which is the nearest point is 118 miles west of Bourke. So that's where my my tribal group come from, and you know, I'm not sure what's expected of me or anything else, but that's where I come from. And my totem is the Ngamba, G-N-A-A-M-B-A. It's a bony brim fish, and been found in the muddy water, rivers and creeks out here, right in that back country. And my beginnings were that a young Scotsman from a very affluent Scottish family came out to Australia, and his mother didn't go much on boys. She had 6 girls, 1 boy, and when the boy was 16 she sent him out to Australia, and she paid what was known, I believe, later on as remittance money. If you had a family member that was an embarrassment or something like that, you sent him out to Australia and paid to keep him out there. And they put it very politely that he came out and he was paid to work as a student on a station. But anyway, he linked up with a bloke, and they got a property called Morden in far western New South Wales, and he was out riding one day and his horse fell with him and broke his pelvis. But some tribal hunters found him and they carried him back to the station. And then one of the carers was an Aboriginal woman, and he married her, and they had a daughter, 1 daughter. And anyway, eventually went broke on the property and decided to go back to the UK. And because his wife ran away with a little girl and she didn't want to go, and he rode the countryside for 2 weeks looking for her. And the eldest said, "You're not going to find her, she won't go." So he went back on his own. But anyway, he later on, Bill Hamilton was his name, he married again and went to New Zealand. But so that little girl happened to be my grandmother. She married another, what was known as half-caste man, and they grew up. The interesting thing about that young Scotsman came out here in, what was it, 147 years ago, or something like that, and took himself a native of this country as his wife. Well, last year, one of my grandsons went back and married a Scottish girl. So it's completed, so the circle's complete. And so I don't know if that's any reconciliation there. And I've always wondered about the use of the word reconciliation. There's so many words in the English language, you've got about 7 different meanings, and depends on who says them and why and how. As we know, we're having trouble with now the 18C thing. But I see it as a matter of connection, of learning to live together. We're a very multicultural country, but I went through the early stages of growing up. We grew up in that back country. We never got caught up in the welfare system because my mother was an Aboriginal and my father was an Australian-born Irishman. So we weren't allowed to live in the towns, the little towns like Whitecliffs and Tippaborough and those places, because Mum was Aboriginal, and then we couldn't live with the Aboriginal communities because Dad was a white man. And that the law that said that. So we were very independent. We lived away from that altogether. And so we had a good mixture of growing up with the white fellas and the black fellas, the whole thing mixed up. But one of the things about it was I know we had trouble for a long time. Well, there was this Talonarius idea that there was no human beings here, but anyway, yes, there were. But I know, I've seen all the different things that have come through with the racism and all that. And today I'm very sensitive to it, meaning that I can identify it very easily. The slightest little bit I can identify it, but I'm no longer a victim of it. But we did for a long time, not allowed in pubs and only certain parts of picture shows and all that. And I know up till 1967, I was listening to people coming out from other countries and they say, come on, Nick, take out a citizenship, become an Aussie, mate, become one of us. And because I had one lot of Aboriginal blood, I wasn't allowed to become one of those. So eventually so I'm talking about this to talk about the breakdown that happened. And anyway, as recent as 1949, my brother and I were we were in the shearing industry, and we had a dispute with a contractor, and he lost the battle. There's 30-odd men in the team, but he couldn't get even, so he went to the local sergeant at Gilgandra and said, what are you going to do about these Hunt brothers? Well, they're not doing anything wrong. He said, they're bloody abos. He said, they're not supposed to be in licensed premises, so the sergeant had to do what he was told, and my brother and I went and had a talk to him. We knew where it come from. So we had to take out these citizens' rights, they called them, but they were exemptions. We were exempt from our Aboriginality, but we weren't Australian citizens. And they called them citizens' rights. Well, they gave me the right to be prosecuted for hunting or fishing out of season, gave me the right to be conscripted for military service, gave me the right to be prosecuted for failing to vote. So there's been some changes since then. And anyway, all that, these are funny little things that have happened all the way along the road. And I remember after I'd become an Australian citizen in 1967, when 97% of the population voted to give the Aboriginals citizenship. But a good few years later, I saw those big brown envelopes that, for at election time, they come out and they used to have on it for those who's not compulsory to vote, and it had Aboriginals. So so I just didn't vote, and I got a letter from the commissioner saying, you vote or else give us a good reason. I wrote back and told him that I didn't because I wasn't compulsory, because I was an Aboriginal. So his response to that I was wrong. So I photocopied it and sent it and said, cast your optics over this. So that's not on those envelopes anymore. So all of this thing, but I did it because the reason it was on there is because it was too much, it was too hard for them to police the areas in the remote areas. So they were going to let them off the hook. My mother went to open up a boarding house in Burke, and she had to take out one of those humiliating things to provide a service for the town in the form of. So it's all coming along, it's all getting broken down and everything. And we're having trouble with, we hear about racism, racist remarks and all that. And look, whilst you've got human beings on this planet, you're going to have racism. And it's an attitudinal thing, as I said. So it all comes along, and you're not going to do anything about it. When I say it's all there, because it's an attitudinal thing, and when there'll be certain people that do it for certain reasons, and as I say, I'm very sensitive to it. I can pick it up, but I'm no longer a victim of it, and I don't have to. And we had to, growing up where we did, my mum raised 8 of us kids by herself. My parents separated when I was about 8. And I remember we lived at Winaring, a little town 118 miles west of Burke, and I believe I was the first person to break the 4-minute mile when I was about 12. And there used to be dances of Saturday nights, and my mother used to play the accordion, and brothers would play banjos and bones and that, and the policeman's wife used to play the piano, and her and my mum were great mates. And I was in the post office on a Saturday afternoon, and a redneck woman there said, who's playing for the dance tonight? And the lady said, oh, Mrs. Hunt and her brothers, I think. And she said, do we have to those niggers in the hall? So this little nigger, I reckon, broke the 4-minute mile getting home to break the news to mother. And I told her, and the copper's wife later on, when she come down and saw Mum, and they talked about it, but Mum and her brother still played for the dances. policeman's wife said, went and confronted this lady, I believe, and told her, she said, the dance can go on without you, but you can't go on without Mrs. Hunt and the brothers. So that's the way we've had to overcome it. And as I said, I've travelled over most of Australia and knocked around, and the only place, there's a little town called Biggar, B-I-G-G-A, between Bathurst and Goulburn up in the hills. And that little place is the only place I've ever been to where there hasn't been some form of racism, and no subtle racism when it goes. And it's incredible to think that little place up in the hills. But as I said, whilst you've got human beings on this planet, you're going to have racism in all sorts of different forms and that sort of thing. So I see reconciliation as getting on with life. We meet up with people, we like some, we fall in love with some, we marry some, we fight with some. And, you know, when love gets in the way, we're not too interested in what the breeding is. And most of it's, but, you know, we talk about the colour and that. And people often say, are you Aboriginal? And well, not always, but I often say, well, what's your interest, you know? I've got as many arms and legs as you have and that sort of thing. And what your background is is none of my business. I wonder why you're interested in mine. But if there's a good enough reason for it, that's okay. So overall, you know, I'm living a good life and a great life. And I'm a published author. That book, it's no longer available, but it's in libraries can get it. And I'm in the process of finalising my own autobiography, and then I've just recently got an Order of Australia medal, so all of this, and I was a drunk for 27 years, and I overcome that. I got into public service and kicked doors open, and you know, I heard the word protocol, and I thought, that sounds like a racehorse, he'd be running it. And I treated it as such most of the time, so I had 8.5 years in health, and then they were glad to see the last of me, and then I moved sideways into corrective services. I was Australia's second Aboriginal probation and parole officer, and I got on fairly well with them, but as I said then, later on I was recognised by people I'd worked with and they recommended me for that order, and that's good, and I appreciate that, but I got my rewards while I was doing the work when you're working with people, and particularly the dregs of the country, you know, you see the so-called hopeless people, and you see that hopeless Joe turn his or her life around. You know, there's a group of people surrounding there, there's women and children and ambulance people, nurses, doctors, police. That one person affects a lot of people. They say 5, but there's a lot of us. So I got my rewards then, and just to have that medal sent up just recently is okay, it's good, thanks for that, and it could be an inspiration to the youngsters coming along now. Now, Kelly asked if she could get me to talk, and that's well, getting me to stop might be a problem. So I think I better close down, and thanks for the opportunity to come and share with you.